Well, hello everyone. I am thrilled to introduce a guest speaker for today who has been able to generate over $1 million in equity and 13K a month in cash flow through multi-units. And his name is Chris. And in our conversation, what I wanted to do is really explore how he scaled his portfolio, like how he started, challenges he overcome, and like what he did to be able to get to this point. So, Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Ben, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to have our conversation today and add value to your audience.
Yeah. No, I'm excited too. I think a lot of people have been really like asking me like, okay, how is it done? Right? Because there's so many in 2024 at the time of this recording, like we can list off the amount of challenges that I think investors have. But before we even get there, can you tell me a little bit about like yourself and your story and like how you got started?
Yeah, absolutely. I was pretty privileged to have parents that had buildings. So I grew up with kind of multifamily buildings within childhood. I can recall like being a 10-year-old and like ripping up carpet at a building. I hated it at the time, didn't understand it, but obviously understand it very well now. Born here in the States, my parents came from Poland. They came in the mid 70s, escaping essentially communism then, and invested in multifamilies. So it was always kind of like on the radar of my mind. I don't know if I necessarily like at the age of 10 like wanted anything to do with this, but I can recall one of my like most important conversations in my life. It was 2021, or no, excuse me, 2001. I'm 15 years old, and I just got back from seeing Fast and Furious in the movie theaters, and it was the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. Coolest thing ever. At the time, I was working. I mean, I started working in high school. I was a host at a restaurant, and then became a waiter when I was 16. But we had this Honda Prelude, and I was like, I had like maybe like $10,000 in the bank at that time. I'm a teenager, and you got to also consider how a 15-year-old brain works. And I'm like, man, I'm gonna turn this Honda Prelude into a rocket. And my dad sat me down, and we had this long conversation about how that's a really bad idea, and I should make it a goal to buy an apartment building. And so I don't share that story because
Sounds boring.
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
You're like,
I don't. Yeah, it does sound boring compared to like I'd be the coolest kid in high school with my red Honda Prelude. But I don't share that story because it was like I know I would have not turned that Honda into a rocket, but I share that story because probably at the age of like 15 or really after that conversation, owning an apartment building was on my radar. It was kind of a long-term goal. And it's a very different, I think, conversation now with how people think about multifamily. I think back then, where my parents certainly and myself certainly, it was kind of just like, okay, I'm going to have this to retire on. It wasn't something that I was going to retire early on or build a portfolio that cash flows significantly. It was just kind of like, people have a 401k and people have an apartment building, and they both kind of help sustain life after you stop working. So I do have a W-2 job. I work in healthcare. Specifically the education side of things. A lot of my work is online. I also see patients, but not at a full time pace. But yeah, that's a little bit about me and real estate and who I am, what I do.
Nice. And so you're able to do all this while you're working full time, right?
Yep. Essentially, so like we'll get in, I'm sure into like acquisitions shortly, but I bought my first building in 2013, and essentially like the strategy was like, you don't hear this certainly like too often nowadays, but it's kind of like frowned upon, but I don't really think it is. But my strategy was essentially like work a W-2, save all your money, put it for a down payment to buy a building, and then do it again, and then do it again, right? And so I've been working the whole time throughout building the portfolio. Probably at some point not going to be working full time given like the portfolio's trajectory and stuff. But yeah, I've been self managing, working full time, and running this real estate portfolio.
I want to touch on that. I think that's important. Like what you said earlier, like a lot of guys that are either like fresh out of college or like around my age, they're kind of like, okay, what do I do? Should I just go? Like, they have the entrepreneurial, like I want to start a business and like I want to buy units and all this stuff. And I actually think the play or the best strategy is like go get a W-2 job making 60 to 80K. And the reason for this is because lenders qualify, as like it's just a lot easier to get loans as a W-2 employee. When you're working a self-employed business, it's still possible. And like there's creative financing, there's a lot of programs for those people. But like point being is if you just want an easier, like fast track to be able to get from point A to point C, like I think having the W-2 job is like the way to go, you know, having that income coming in. Right.
Totally agreed. Yeah. There's a lot of like OPM, other people's money, and, syndicators have come out and, all you need is a deal. It's all you need. And then raise a capital. And kind of the sweat equity, this like it's passive and it's an asset class. It's really a business, a cash flowing business, just the way a laundromat or car wash is. It's a cash flowing business, and it's perfectly fine. And I think actually the right way to have that W-2. You mentioned the loan benefits from it. Embrace sweat equity.
Yeah, right. And like a lot of business owners write off their tax returns and don't show a lot of income typically. And so they come into it showing, they made really 200 last year, but they showed 20,000 on their tax returns. So now they can't buy anything, right? Whereas W-2, like, yeah, you're paying taxes, but like it's the like use the active income to make the passive income. And that's the biggest thing is like people just, I think, have active income till they're 70 and then they're like, okay, now what? Or like they're tired. For you, tell me, so like touch a little bit more about 2013. You bought your first building. How were you able to finance it? Like, how did you get started with that?
Yeah. So I mean, 2013 was a pretty interesting time. Obviously, we had the Great Recession, just a few years earlier. I was at the time working at a hospital. I was like within the Illinois Medical District, kind of just between like Little Italy and Tri-Taylor. And so I essentially wanted to buy. Again, I had this idea that I wanted to buy an apartment building, but obviously I need a place to live in. And so the logical thing that came to my mind is like, let's buy a building that's close to work. I can ride my bike to work and I can live in the building. I didn't even know that was called house hacking until like 4 years ago. And
I was just gonna say, so house hacking pretty much.
Well, house hacking essentially, but it was just like, it was like it was a 5 flat in the Tri-Taylor community. I was initially looking for like a 2 to 3 flat. Like I wasn't looking at like I want to buy like a big building or anything or a commercial building. But the 5 flat came along and I had saved up over the last decade W-2 money. I was a waiter at a pancake house, and I don't know. I probably made like a few $100s a week, but basically all the money I saved over the last decade from that conversation after I saw Fast and Furious to the age of 25, that decade I saved all my money up. I had a little bit over $200,000. And so if you like transform back to like 2013, like there weren't many like 25-year-olds who had that. So I would go and meet with like lenders. I remember I met with lenders. He looked at me just like, you're wasting my time. I'm like, well,
you wouldn't even believe you.
I have this money. And then the conversation completely changed. But the first building, I put 45% down on it. That's like, not a lot of people like do that nowadays, but commercial like loans are like, you get like for buildings that are 5 units and up are commercial loans. And so commercial lending like started to come back around that time. My first mortgage, the bank had said like, hey, we just started this, like we haven't been doing it for the last 5 years. And we have like this promotion. It's like 4% for interest rate for this, for loans. And I went with that. So it was like about 45% down. I lived in 1 unit. They're all 2-bed, 1 bath. So I lived in 1 unit. I got a roommate with me, and then I rented out the other 4. But yeah, that was in 2013.
Yeah, so you saved money. I mean, that's like for 10 years. That's crazy.
Yeah.
For that long that you were that focused. You didn't get distracted and like bought, the next car.
I got a lot of criticism because from my peers, people who are like in their early 20s. And if there's anyone listening who's kind of in that like early 20s age and there's a lot of noise of, you should be doing this and you should be going out to these nice restaurants and like going out, you're only 20 once. I would say my 20s were very much building this whole journey. And I'm so grateful to have done it. And a lot of friends from high school, I had a friend in high school, we were playing video games and he's like, why are you working every weekend? Like, what are you trying to, he literally said to me, like, what are you trying to do? Build a rocket ship? Like, he was just so frustrated with me. He was just like, what's wrong with you? And we were talking maybe like 4 years back. He's like, man, I wish I did that. So,
So
anyone,
funny.
anyone who
Oh
feels the
my
pressure,
God.
social pressure to like not to step away from your vision, just like, keep grinding and you'll get there.
Yeah. Because that's the average person. That's just the mentality is like
Yeah.
go to school, get a job. We're Romanian too, so like my parents came from communism. Like I understand the whole like this is the American dream, like school, job, retire 62.5, and then rely on like that's it. Like what else is there? But I think that's the problem is like I have clients calling me now that are 60, Chris, and they're like, I wish I bought a multi-unit building
Yeah.
like when I was in my 30s.
Yeah.
And now they're like thinking about going back to work because they just don't have enough income, and especially after inflation, like COVID, really, I think there's a lot of price increases that happen. So people are feeling the effects now. So I love that. I think that's incredible. When you started out, though, I mean, it sounds like it was pretty easy, but did you have any challenges aside from the peer pressure? Any challenges that you faced when you started out and like how you overcame them? I guess maybe on like building 2 or 3.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say like initially starting out, just learning how to be a landlord. And I mean,
Mm,
there's a lot of like legality around like how you do things, for example, like how you handle security deposits, but even just like the operations of property management, lots of like do-it-yourself fixing, like cleaning after tenants. And some of it was like a lack of just procedures, that lack of communication of like, hey, here's some photos of the unit when you moved in. My rule is give it back the way you received it. And again, here are the photos. Like not having those kind of procedures in place led into challenges, like, okay, like they cleaned it, but not really. I can't really hand this over. So I'm going to spend the next like 6 hours, like, cleaning this apartment. So those were definitely challenges. Like things like lost keys as well. Like what's the policy on that? If they lost their keys, like so just kind of having more like operationalizing more around the property management side of things. I'd say for sure, just like developing a rehab team.
mm,
Especially after COVID, it's been very challenging. But even pre-COVID, early on, just like finding people and getting quotes and things. I think, I mean, we can talk about different strategies, but the value add strategy, specifically like light cosmetic rehabs, are ways to get a good return. And part of the skill set of that is finding people who are going to rehab your place and do it for a good price and do a good job with it. So I think that was part of it. And then the last piece, and you can almost look at my story and kind of split up into two kind of like phases. I got a lot of knowledge like over the last like 4 or 5 years that really has transformed my portfolio. I was
so
privileged to grow up with parents who had this, but I followed their formula, and it's not a wrong formula, but had I stuck on that formula, I would not have the portfolio I have today. No way. I mentioned I put 45% down on my first building. I also did on my second building in 2016. And I could have bought 2 buildings for like 25% down with that money. And I'd be even in a better position. And so challenges from just a knowledge aspect, specifically with scaling, leveraging, like the cash out refi. It was a brick to my head when I heard that you don't get taxed on a cash out refi.
Yeah, it's tax free, right?
And I learned that 3 years ago. So you have to understand that I had like over like I don't know, like $1 million in equity. I have like 11 units at this time, and I'm just learning that a cash out refi is like a way to scale up and leverage. Concepts on like return on equity, cost segregation studies. These are things that are newish to my journey. I mean, this is like 2021. Like knowledge that I acquired, and there's so much information on now, and specifically platforms like your podcast, where you learn these things, and you kind of you start. Someone might be listening to me and say like, well, he's lucky, like he bought in 2013. Of like anything you bought then is doing much better now, and he had parents that kind of showed him the ropes in a way. But at the same time, like nowadays, specifically those who don't have buildings are equipped with those knowledge to do it right. So there's challenges from the operation side, but the knowledge side is a big part of like where my full portfolio has gone, and just acquiring all that knowledge to build it.
So you mentioned a lot of really good things like and I want to just piggyback because having a rehab team is great. Like especially from a handyman point of view, like if things go wrong in the building, you have someone that can fix it pretty
Yep.
quick. But also on the purchase or acquisition side of things, they could add value. And I think the value add in multi units is where the spread or the margin really can come in, where a lot of people are cash flowing and doing well. Because I think right now, if you're buying something turnkey, it might not be as easy to generate cash flow. But if you buy something relatively cheap or at a good price, the problem is having, like you said, yes, good rehab team, but to add on, like someone who can identify if like structurally is a
Yep.
good deal,
Yep.
meaning like the actual bones of the property, because sometimes it might need work, but then you get in there and you're like, wow, this needs way more work than I
Yep.
thought. And I have so many clients that, think that they have to put 20% down, and they'll put 20% down on a 4 unit and they have no money left for renovations when they could have just done a 5% down, had money for renovations, or even heck, done a home style renovation loan where they could, the lender will give them money for construction. So, I think rehab team is key, but go back a little bit on the operations part. Like, what have you done to be able to streamline or like make it easier for you to manage expectations, like with tenants?
Um, Everything I've done has been like through a digital like platform, like lease signing and things like that. Specifically like the relationship side of things with tenants, setting expectations out up front. You have to understand, like they get a lease that's like 20 plus pages. They don't read every like sentence in there. They may, but they might not retain it all. Setting expectations and just being a good landlord. Like I mentioned earlier, like it's oftentimes called an asset class, and maybe it is an asset class if you work for investment banking or you buy a REIT, but you're buying a business, and this specific business has a product and service to it. The product is the like physical real estate you're renting out, and then the service is like what you're providing to the tenants, right? And so real estate exists for people, right? Like if you have like a mansion on the moon, it's probably not worth anything, right? Because no one's living there. But you know, it exists for people. And so like never forget that. Like you have your asset, which is the building, but your asset's really those tenants who are paying you, right?
Hmm.
I think it's
Yeah, so treat
important.
them well, right?
Treat them well.
Treat them well, do a good job, and like they'll return the favor.
Absolutely. Like respond to their concerns quickly.
Yeah.
Having those systems in place, like a handyman, super key, because if they say like, hey, my I don't know, like a common one might be like, hey, the sink's like draining really slow or it's even clogged kind of thing. Like being able to resolve that pretty quickly is going to have a happy tenant. It's going to translate into a happy landlord. A small example. I had in my last purchase, we had like porch pirates coming, and these are all over the country, right? You can't like really prevent that to an extent, but I had
I didn't even know that's what they're called. That's
yeah,
crazy.
there were the people who, the dirt bags who come and steal the packages after they're delivered. But
Yeah.
someone reached out to me twice, like, hey, this happened again, and it happened to be something that my mom sent me from Minnesota. And what I ended up doing was buying like a $200 like steel like bin that has like all the logos of the delivery carriers and it has a code to it, and I put it there. And this specific tenant said, like, hey, my previous landlord would have never done that. They would have just said, like, oh, like that's unfortunate, but really it's not kind of within my, it's not really within my responsibilities to do much about that. It's unfortunate,
Mm,
and so their problem kind of became my problem. And so
mm,
you might hear that and be like, oh, okay, he was just like being a nice landlord. But part of like being a successful landlord is retention, right? Success, like satisfied tenants lead into retained tenants, and retained tenants lead into a good business, right? And so that's kind of that service aspect to it. Obviously, don't like go crazy, right? There's numbers to these whole things, but for me, it was worth it to put a $200 bin. And let's say like I have a list of property and it's apples to apples. People are between two buildings. Like, hey, this guy has like a bin that gets his packages safely. It's not even about the bin. It's about like, hey, this landlord is a little bit, proactive, or he's solving this problem that I may not even ever have, but it's a reflection of kind of the service that I'm going to get. You know what I mean? So,
mm. Yeah.
things like that.
I,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, I think a lot of it feels like there's this landlord versus tenant like what do I call it? Like I see this a lot. Attitude, I guess you call it attitude, or like it's kind of like us versus them. I'm just trying to, like build my cash flow and go home. Like I don't really care. Like there's like, and I think you have to. I agree with that. Like it's a business. Like these people are your customers, and if you take care of them, if you do a good job, like you will be rewarded, and you will have that retention, which is everybody's favorite thing, right? Is retention, and like the least amount of turnover as possible, right?
Right.
And I think the little things go a long way, and they see that. And so like the $200 box, they're like,
Yep.
wow, like what does that show? Okay, Chris cares, like, and I get it. I understand too the flip side of like tenants are taking advantage of landlords, and there's all this drama, and it's like, okay, like fair enough. But I think if you run it, especially now after COVID, I think customer service is like significantly declined, and I think people just care less now. And so people are surprised when you provide like 5-star like service, if you want to call it that, right?
Yeah, of course, the flip side to that is just kind of being abused from it. So just being like
Yeah.
upfront regulations, not regulation, but just like, kind of expectations and thing. I'll give you an example of the flip side. I had a tenant say like, hey, can we get like a bidet on our toilet? And this is after they moved in. And so what I said to them is like, I'll approve the bidet, like that's fine. You can install a bidet, kind of something that you get at like, I don't know, like Costco or something, and it kind of hooks up to your toilet. You're not switching out the whole toilet. But I provided that, you guys had to walk through this apartment, you guys had moved in, like it's not really part of the apartment. Again, you can install the bidet, but I just asked that you provide the apartment back to me the way that it was provided, which would be without the bidet. And so it has to be done in a way that there's not like leaking and things like that. So for that specific case, it said, yes, you can do it. It's kind of up to you guys, like how, you guys have to get someone to do that. And I would just want to inspect it afterwards. And so that's that kind of flip side. Like if all my units ask me for a bidet, I don't even know how many toilets I own. Like if I put a bidet in all of them, it would probably affect the cash flow, at least for that month, significantly, right? So that's the flip side.
That's a good point. Do you do any though, like special, hey, Merry Christmas, here's $200 off rent, or happy birthdays, or gifts? Like, do you do any of that?
I've never done anything like that. I've had tenants like give sometimes like I had a guy who was Italian. He gave me like a focaccia bread for Christmas. It was really, really nice. But I live in a neighborhood that I rent in. And so that helps, like minor detail, that helps a lot for running your own portfolio and self-managing it. But a lot of my tenants are either like students, like grad students, medical students, or they work part of the hospital system. So I'll go on walks and I'll run into them. And so I'll say, oh, yeah, how's it going? How's your semester going? Oh, great. Oh, okay. What year medical school are you in? Okay, third year. Okay, where are you? What clinical sites are you at? Oh, very cool. And so that kind of like, I'm not friends with them, but that friendliness or professionalism and respect, I think helps a lot in relationship as well. Like, hey, I'm a human. I'm not some like slumlord who's just taking your money kind of thing. So just kind of having that kind of politeness with them, I think helps as well.
I agree. Like you're building that rapport, that relationship, and like human to human, respect to respect. Like people value that. What would you say is, like, getting into the meat of things, like how did you actually achieve the like over 10K in cash flow currently that you have now in your portfolio? And like what would you say? So 2 questions: how did you do it, and then what would you say the formula is, if you had to like break it down as simply as possible for like someone to like understand kind of how that works?
Totally. Like strategy wise, like all my portfolios is like long-term, like buy and hold. I've never sold a property. I've never Airbnb a property. I've never medium-term rental a property where it's like a 3-month, like traveling nurse situation. They've all been 12-month leases. I have always house hacked. I'm still house hacking. I'm in unit 2 of a 2-unit building. This is where I live. It's kind of like a duplex up. It's specifically like for like an owner occupant situation, but house hacking has helped tremendously. All my acquisitions have been more or less like cosmetic rehab value adds. I've never bought anything turnkey. You mentioned earlier about like having like your rehab team or your contractor come in with you. My specific like buy box I don't want any galvanized piping. That stuff has like a lifetime to it. All the piping I look for is like copper, PVC. Roof, foundation, that kind of stuff. Most, with the exception of my last building, all the buildings I've bought have been younger than me. I was born in 1987, so they're all like 90s type builds, and so they're all built well. They're all relatively new. We don't think of it as new construction, but in this like spectrum of like buildings in Chicago, it's fairly new.
Yeah.
At least like mechanicals and things like that. They all have like central air and heat and duct works already in there. So again, light cosmetic rehab, bathrooms, floorings, kitchen, that kind of stuff. So that kind of buy box and acquiring those specific buildings, I think has contributed a lot to it. I mentioned earlier that I did not really, so like the BRRRR method, buy, rehab, rent, refinance, is like kind of like the tried and true like scaling method. It certainly has been over the last 10 years. I didn't really do that. Again, I didn't have the knowledge to do that in my first 5 years of doing this. So I built a lot of equity, and I did do my first cash out refi in 2022, and that money was used to buy my last acquisition. So there, now to your how did you build the cash flow? There's a correlation obviously with how much equity you have in a property, how much you're cash flowing. If you put 5% down versus buy it out outright cash, you're going to have a lot more cash flow with the buying something with 100% down. Obviously, you say goodbye to the 100% of your money, but right. So there's obviously like a leverage conversation there, right? But having like those first two buildings with very strong equity positions, plus let's not forget they're appreciating over this time as well. Having that like really built like a good cash flow position. At the same time, I'm essentially putting almost all my money back into real estate. Like it's like, okay, I bought two buildings, I want to buy a third, and so I'm saving up, and it snowballs then. I mean, like you have the people coming in, you have the W-2 money coming in. The first building's hands down the hardest to buy. The second one's not as hard, and the third one's like, whoa, okay, like this snowball is really like getting traction. Continuing to do W-2, having like a good equity position earlier. A little bit just on like the architecture of the portfolio. They're all, I bought my first building in Tri-Taylor, just kind of west of the hospitals, in 2015. I bought a 6 flat in Wheeling in 2016. And the buildings out in the suburbs have typically their like multiples are like a little bit less, like they're typically pretty good cash flowing buildings. And I didn't buy my next building until 2021. That was a 3 flat in Tri-Taylor. I bought my current home in 2022. The next year, a few flat, and then I bought a 4 flat last year, just about like 11 months ago or so. So nice. The portfolio is like doubled in size over the last like 2 years, and again, that's back into that like knowledge that I acquired from watching podcasts.
It's like the snowball.
It's a snowball. It's a snowball, but it's also kind of like, I only bought this last building because I cash out refied my first building. And that money got used. And so it was kind of the return on the equity of that is a lot higher than the cash flow itself. But
so to break that down too, just before you move on, like for anyone like who's listening, so like the formula is, this is the formula, like the first building is the hardest, right? Like that's where it's like, okay, you have to learn, how does it work? Like, what do you have to do to put down, all that stuff. And like lenders look at credit, income, and assets. So they're the 3 pillars. And then the fourth one you could say is the property itself. But for anyone listening, like those have to be in order for you to qualify to get the financing you need. But basically in a nutshell is buy a property that needs work, fix it up. You've now just raised the value. You've also, now you're attracting top quality tenants, right? And they're not going to bother you because ideally if you fix it up correctly, there should be no issues happening in the building itself. So then if that is happening, then now you have some equity to play with tax-free that you can pull money out and now go use to buy the second building. And so the BRRRR method is traditionally used to sell, like, buy a property, fix it up, cash out, or you could just sell it. Like there's different strategies, but the multi-unit BRRRR method that we're talking about is, buy, fix it up either with your own money, or you could fix it up with the lender's money. Like we have programs to give, construction loans for people, and then you can take cash out, you could rent it, and then like just do it again and then house hack over and over again.
Totally.
And that's in a nutshell, like pretty much the formula, right? Make enough money with your W-2 job to qualify for the loans, get the financing, and then like you said, your portfolio like doubled a lot quicker than it took previously, just because you knew you had all this experience, you've done it before, and you had like equity to actually leverage, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Would you agree with that, or what are your thoughts on that?
No, that's like a perfect kind of synopsis of really it all. That first building's the hardest. We lived, so I rehabbed the first unit I lived in. Got married, moved to another unit. My wife somehow still married to me. We rehabbed that unit. There's like dust all over. Like we're living in this unit, we're like rehabbing it at the same time. Like, if you're young and single, I think the way to do it is you buy a 3-flat, you live in one unit, or you rehab it while you're there. Then you move to the other unit, you rehab that one. Then you have like no downtime. But obviously, like there's a cost to that. You're sacrificing like living in this place. But like if we're strictly looking at like, hey, Ben, this is really tough. Rates are not 3% anymore. I don't know how to do this. There's nothing on the market. House hacking is probably do it, and doing like approaching your first building in that way and knowing that there's going to be like a good amount of sweat equity in this will translate into an easier second buy, an easier third position. And it really truly snowballs after that. I
agree.
It's like
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say like Warren Buffett's like thing is like make money while you sleep. Like you truly like wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, like I haven't really been tracking this, but like this is doing really, really well. So
yeah. And like a lot of the hard work is up front. If you do everything right up front, after that, it's just 1 to 2 hours a week of maintenance, if that, yeah, things might come up, but like if you get the right construction project handled and like everything is up to code, or at least like where it needs to be, you're not like, I have a lot of my clients that are just like, yeah, I did a lot of the hard work up front and now I'm just collecting rent. That's it. Like the tenant never calls me,
totally.
like I don't have any issues. But one thing I want to say too is like for anyone who's like, man, okay, that all sounds great, but like, the down payment, right? So like right now, for anyone who's looking, you could either buy a multi-unit property, conventional or FHA. I just want to touch on this, Chris, and then I want to get back to your, but FHA is 3.5 down for any 2 to 4 unit property. Right now, conventional allows you to do 5% down. If you're trying to buy an FHA building 3 to 4 units, it won't work because there's a self-sufficiency test. So I would put that aside. But if you're trying to buy a 3 or 4 unit building, which has the highest ROI, go for conventional, which is 5% down, right? And what I would recommend is if maybe money's tight, like maybe you have the job, you don't have the cash, I would actually like get friends in on the vision, right? So like how you guys would, just how like you're buying a business or you're investing in a business, this is the same thing. So multiple people can share in the equity or share in the profit just to get your first building under your belt. What I would recommend is don't rent out to your friends, right? Like if you guys can all house hack and like cram it in maybe in like one unit, like that might be an option. But like sometimes pulling in money together, like for guys that don't have a lot of money, like 10 grand here, 20 grand here, 10 grand there. And then like you guys can work out a partnership deal where you're all managing this building together. And then from there, you could split off. Like once you have your established jobs, once you kind of learn how to be a landlord, like that's where I see a lot of guys that are younger accomplishing it much faster. Or you could land a $200,000 a year job. That too, but if you don't have that, I think working with people that believe in the same like direction and vision as you is key. And and be careful with renting out to friends and family. That's like, I don't know what your thought. I don't know if you have any takes on that, because a lot of people lose money because they'll give their friends a good deal, and then and they're losing a lot of money, and it's awkward, and
you can end up in some murky waters. Like friendships and like tenants are like two very different relationships. So there's probably cases where those relationships could be like set aside, like, hey, you're paying me this, but it could be pretty murky. I mean, it's situational. Every situation could be a little bit different, but I would agree in general, that can end you up in some murky waters and lose a friendship. It's kind of like having your friend ask you to borrow money. It's not really that different. It could really end up going the wrong way.
Right. And then they could, hey, I'm struggling this month, like I need time. And then before you know it, 12 months goes by and you haven't collected rent. And then at least that's what I'm hearing now from some of my investors that are like, man, I should have never rented this out to my cousin or to
Yes.
my, who has a 600 credit score. Um, but like what what factors did you look at for the markets that you wanted to invest in? So like we're in the Chicagoland market, but like what specifically did you look for you to know like, okay, this is like a good deal location wise?
Yeah, totally. It happened pretty organically, as I mentioned earlier. The idea was like buy a building, but I'm going to live in there. Like that's like living in there is like the first problem solved, and I wanted to be a bike rides to work. It ended up being a fantastic market to rent out in. Tenants like profiles they're typically like grad or med students, or they're tied with the hospitals, like medical residents and stuff like that. And that's a great market. Typically, these are people with like great credit scores. They want a place to sleep and study. There's semi-transitional in life, like they'll like on average they'll stay for like 2 to 3 years, and I think that's a good time. They're not necessarily like long-term tenants staying there for a decade, but they're not staying there for a year. On move out, it's a lot easier to raise the rent when you can raise the market when someone's coming in. It's a lot more difficult to have a conversation, say like, hey, same apartment, $100 more a month, next year. So 2 to 3 years is like the average time to stay. Appreciation wise, it's been pretty good as well. I think like the Tri-Taylor and Little Italy neighborhoods, like there's been enough demand and there's been enough like growth in that area as well. A lot of like what's going on in like the West Loop has kind of like traveled its way down to Ogden. So it's made its way like towards like the Illinois Medical District, in terms of like commercial development being more. I've seen like over the last like 2-3 years, like the bread and butter was like grad students, med students, like here and there, like a hospital worker. But now I'm seeing people like, oh, I work in like some other industry and 5 miles away, but like I'd like to live in this neighborhood. So yeah, the market selection was very organic from where I wanted to live in, but it's really become kind of like the only market I've really been in, Criterion literally, and that's super helpful from like an analysis standpoint. I know rents really, really, really well. I probably go on Zillow like 2-3 times a week. Like, okay, someone posted for this much. When I started out, then I would go pretend that I wanted to. This is like before like digital stuff. I would go pretend that I wanted to go rent an apartment. I would 2 apartments. And I'd be like, okay, the rent's like $1,200 for this like 2-bedroom, and I would like look around and I'd compare it to my own unit. I think you got to be like a little bit above your competition. Like, don't go nuts and crazy. But hey, if you have a washer and dryer in your unit and your competition doesn't, that's where the tenants flock to. So knowing my market was really helpful for like putting like prices for rents, but also with acquisition. I call it like a property. I forget what the term I use, like property avatar. It's this idea that you've done so much analysis that it's so second nature. When you see like a 4 flat for this price, you don't have to run the numbers. You know more or less what property taxes will be. You know what the insurance is going to be on it. You know what the rents are going to be on it. You've done so much like analysis on this that it's just like our last building. Like I told my agent, like, hey, we're going to see this and we're going to put an offer on it. And then we saw it. And my wife's talking to the listing agent. My wife had seen like the second unit. She turns to the listing agent. She's like, "Hey, like, let's make a deal. What's going on? Like, what are we waiting for?" Because we've done so much that it becomes kind of second nature. That all the parameters have been checked. I don't need to run numbers because I've done this so many times and I know this market so well. I don't. Yeah. I really don't need more information. I've already been through this enough time.
It's so funny you say that. I literally know the taxes, the monthly taxes and monthly insurance. I could at the top of my head spit out if you tell me the price in the area, because I've just looked at so many, just for my clients, I've done so many loans all throughout. They're like, I know, oh, you're buying in this area at this price point. Okay, your taxes are probably $800 a month or $1,000 a month. It's like you can kind of, and I'm usually like right around there. So it's funny you say that. I kind of, that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not. Of course, I'm not saying anything bad about analysis. You have to like, run it through a calculator or at least kind of get your income and expenses kind of like figured out. But once you've done enough times, I think like what makes a successful investor is the ability to calculate risk and make a decision quickly. And once you've done so much analysis, like the risks, then like the decision, like to getting to like your brain to make a decision is so much easier after you've been through it so many times. Even if you didn't acquire, you've just analyzed like every single building that's come on the MLS. You've run the numbers on it. Oh, that's one thing I didn't mention earlier. All my buildings were like MLS. So like there's no need to get into like with me at least, like creative financing or like, hey, did you send out letters to people? I bought everything off the MLS. I didn't do any kind of, backdoor deals kind of things. With the actually the second unit we bought was actually kind of like we knew like the owner, and it was kind of like, I think it went public for a day, but all the other ones have been just like, hey, this looks like a great deal on the MLS. And so I don't want to like, say anything like some people might be listening and say, oh, my understanding was like to get a deal, you had to go off market or do some other strategy. You can find great deals on MLS.
You can, and like sometimes they're overpriced or not priced correctly. Sometimes they are. Like you just have to do the research. And I think in a market where inventory is tight, you have to look at off market to expand your reach. But what have you found, Chris, like is the best value adds for your units to attract, like to get top dollar rent or beat out your competition? Like what have you done?
Yeah, I think like probably the most important like rooms are like the kitchen and bathroom. Don't underestimate like flooring and paint. That can totally transform a room. We've put vinyl flooring into all of our units. I think they're great for, traffic and, I mean, they're essentially like made out of plastic, but they last a very, very long time. They look more or less nice. So flooring and paint can really transform a room, like larger, like more costly rehabs, like kitchens and baths. And so, if there's like wood cabinets that were there in good condition, we've painted them, and then we've put like a quartz countertop on top. And if they're not great cabinets, then we've bought like new cabinets. In our last building, we put washer and dryer in all the units. That's like some people. That's like think like a tenant when you're like in the investor seat. Like, what would you look for? And some people are like, I don't want to look at anything unless it has like I'm not taking my laundry like off site, and I don't really want to take it downstairs like 2 floors down and get quarters and okay, I want to do my laundry now, but someone else is using it. So a washer and dryer can really, I mean, you can get your money back within a year.
My 100%. Like my wife and I, when we were looking to buy our house, we were looking at condos and we had to have an in-unit washer and dryer. Like we were willing to spend the extra couple $100 if that's what it meant to not go to laundromat, And like I think a lot of tenants think the exact same way, right? Like they don't want to what you said. And then too, I looked at a Curbio report a couple years ago. So it's kind of old, but I think it's still relevant. It looked at all the home renovations that produce the highest ROI for anyone looking to sell, but I still think it applies here. And so what was fascinating was the highest thing you could do that provides the best return on investment for your home or your building was paint. They're saying a bucket of paint or like repainting actually did the most work, which was just so interesting to me. I mean, paint is cheap, so I think that's why the ROI, but like you said, just having good flooring and having a good paint job that like makes sense. So like not doing like super unique colors, doing something neutral enough, but also like revamping that, I think really just helps your like unit stand out, right?
So I have this, I don't know if other people share this, but my own theory is that people make a decision within the first 10 seconds of walking your place. They know the price, they know the neighborhood, otherwise like they wouldn't be looking there. Like they're seeing probably other apartments in their neighborhood. Just walking into, and this is maybe ties it a little bit into that like service or like landlord identity. Like, okay, paint's clean. Like it's not like stuffed up. Like he painted it recently. Flooring looks nice. It's not just the product piece of it, but it's like the service piece. What type of like property manager like has this place? Someone who clearly cares or has pride in his units. And so, flooring and paint. Don't underestimate those.
Nope. Yeah. And I know you mentioned. So you mentioned earlier you self-manage. How come? Like, why do you self-manage and not like hire a company?
Yeah, I mean house hacking obviously made it super easy. Like you're on site. Like someone's like, hey, like I'm locked out. Okay, I'll be right downstairs. But obviously you're going to make a lot more cash flow doing that. Over the last year, I'd say 2 years, like max, I've really taken a very conscious changes into really automating things, kind of stepping out of that do-it-yourself landlord, DIY landlord, and being more of like a project manager.
Mm,
I really want to get to a point where, and I'm pretty much at this point where if I get a phone call, my next action is another phone call, right? And so
mm.
I don't necessarily, there's probably a lot of value in having someone else manage your place, but I guess at the moment I'm questioning like what the value is that I can't provide myself without spending too much time. Back into like the value add, you mentioned this, I believe, twice. You don't have to go back, like you just rehabbed it. I mean, yeah, maybe after 5 years, like the dishwasher is like, not draining water properly or something. But for the most part, you're not getting like a lot of phone calls. I have 5 buildings. I live in one of them. I think 18 units. And you can see I'm thinking, I don't, some people are like brag about how many doors they have. It doesn't really matter. But I'm not getting calls once a week. I'm not getting calls. I might not hear from my,
Seriously?
yeah, I might not hear
You
from
have
my,
eight, so you
yeah.
roughly have 18, right? I thought you said 11 earlier, or was that
No, 11
11
was the
at the
first 2
time?
buildings, a 3 flat. Let's
First
do it
two.
now. 11, 14, then the 4 flat, 18, and then the one below me. It's the 19 units, 20 if you
Wow.
count
Okay,
those.
so you have 19 units,
Yep.
and how many calls are you getting on average, would you say? Like a
Um,
month?
pretty sporadic. I mean, sometimes 0 a month. I don't spend more than for managing. I
Yeah.
don't spend more than like an hour or 2 a week. I'll tell you.
Wow.
So my market is very cyclical. It's July and August. You miss August, and I've done this twice, and you book in September, you miss the students, like the hospital residents, you miss them for sure. And so there's a part of the year that I'm working in the business and a part of the year I'm working on the business. In the summer, I'm working in the business. Like I need to get these places rented. I need to market them properly. I need to make sure people move in. And usually within that first week or two, I'll get like, hey, the blinds are a little bit loose or something like that, like really small stuff. Like my wife and I do a pretty good like inspection after people move out. But occasionally like, hey, like this cycle, the toilet was like a little bit like loose. So I just call my handyman and we can take care of that pretty quickly. But yeah, like to answer your question, it could be a little sporadic, but I might not get a phone call for 3 months, Ben. I'm being like, I'm not embellishing. I'm being brutally honest. I might not hear from tenants for some time. And a lot of that has to do with they acquired great, like the expectations. So the relationship, they have like expectations from me and like what's my responsibilities, what's their responsibilities. So they're not, for example, they're not calling me for like a light bulb. Like it's in the lease. Like if a light bulb goes out, it's your responsibility to change. If they do contact me, I'll be like, yeah, sure, whatever. I have like a bunch of those like lying around. Here's one. But the expectations of it, but then just they're recently rehabbed. So I mean, it's gonna be more often like an appliance breakdown. I mentioned the dishwasher because that happened like a couple years ago, and I went to HomeDepot.com and solved that problem in like 20 minutes. I was able to having that portfolio built that it's not like a big hit. I think when you're starting out, you have a little bit things are a little bit more tight, but yeah, I mean, it'll be like I mentioned the porch pirating thing.
Yeah.
And there was no expectation there from the tenants. They're actually like, hey, FYI, like this happened. It kind of sucks. I just want to let you know it's like in the neighborhood. And I came back with them with like, hey, I'll put this like this bin there. And they're like, oh, really? That's awesome.
Right.
But yeah,
Wow. They weren't even expecting it. Yeah. They weren't asking. They were just, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't get much calls. And
Wow.
I think when I do get those calls, I've built up those like automated systems to be more of a project manager than like, hey, let me run over there and do that. Now here and there, if it's like, hey, the sink's like draining pretty slow, I'll be like, I got nothing going on right now. Like door to door, I'll be back at my door like within an hour. I can like snake it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think really doing a value add and having a nice unit and then getting the person in there that's going to like take care of it well. Screening is like more important than ever now. Like
I was just going to ask you about that. Like, what's your process for screening tenants?
I do everything on a Zillow platform. It's free. I'm not like paid by Zillow to say anything about it, but about a year ago, I was like, why don't I have like a software that helps me with this? And so I was on a search for software and I was posting on Zillow at the same time. And I get this email like, hey, try like the rental manager. I don't even know what it's called, but it's like the property management thing. And I was like, okay, let's see what it is. And it was like, in my mind, I was like, the problems I need to solve are a digital lease, I wanted payments because I was doing everything on Zelle, and I was like, gosh,
Oh wow.
I'm like, I like paid for sushi, and then I got like, I got like a Zelle payment there. Like you lose track of stuff when you're like mixing it in with your own like finances. And
Yeah.
obviously you can't do that if you have like business entities like LLCs and stuff where you shouldn't. But yeah, I was like, probably need software to solve for me, or like I need the listing. Zillow does that, and I need like a digital lease. I could pay like DocuSign fees or whatever, but I need a digital lease. Payments, and then like a communication thing, or like a place to house like photos, for example, of like move-in like reports would be great. And it had all those things. And so over the last year, I moved over everything to there, and it's been super easy to kind of work with.
Nice.
But I
Yeah.
don't think self-management's all that difficult if you have systems in place. If you're DIY and you don't have a process, or like, I get a phone call and I don't know how to deal with it, it's going to be really, really tough. But if you've thought through things, so for example, someone's like lost their keys. I'm on vacation. How do you solve that problem? Well, I put lock boxes. I don't like tell my tenants like, hey, there's lock boxes, like, so use them anytime. But that's like a plan B. If I can't run over there to like help you get in, if I'm like at the airport, or I'm just not available there, or my handyman's like not available to come out, like plan B is a lockbox kind of thing. And that's like I put all my list of problems, like what are my problems that I'm having, or what's like costing me all this time from the management piece, and then like an arrow, and then what's the solution to that problem. Another one was just like cleaning, like, hey, make sure you give it back to me clean. Well, that's a pretty subjective, like clean to you might be clean, might be different to me, might be different to someone else. And so I created just like a little like attachment, and I sent it out like a month before, like, hey, here's expectations of cleaning. Don't like throw your couch like in the middle of the alley kind of thing. I can get a fine for that. So again, back to relationships, back to expectations, like sending that stuff out earlier and having like automated systems, or at least like I know what I'm going to do when this problem comes, because that problem will come. Will make it a lot easier to self-manage.
I love that. That's so good. But when you have the tenants coming in, like, do you have things that you look for to know, like, okay, this is a good tenant? Like, anything that you look for there?
Yeah. So the things I look at, credit scores, and I put this on my listing because you need to screen everyone fairly. Everyone, you need to be consistent in your screening and not discriminate anyone. But I put a credit score of 670 or better on my listing, 2.5 income to monthly rent. Let's not forget my market. Like I mentioned earlier, like part of like being a successful investor is being able to calculate risk. The sole metric of someone being a medical student means a lot to me. Like they're probably not going to trash a place. Now it's not like a quantifiable thing. Like if their credit score is like 400, okay, let's keep looking. But having that market of like grad students, like hospital workers, like they like, I know that market. Like they want a place to like sleep and study. They want a quiet place. And so that's part of that. Again, like real estate exists for people. So like your market is not necessarily like what neighborhood has nice buildings. It's like who lives in those neighborhoods and what kind of people. And so that's been a big part of the screening. But credit score, Zillow does this as well. I get all my applications through there. They check a background check. They check like a court check to see if there are any like previous evictions. They can upload like their W-2s or like or their pay stubs. Now I get a lot of students, so a lot of times I have parents co-sign, and it also means a lot to me if like a parent comes to the showing like with like 20-year-old to go see an apartment, because it says to me like, hey, like mom or dad is gonna be paying. They want their son or daughter to stay like in a nice safe place. Chances are they're going to be a good tenant that's going to take care of the place. But I would say my specific market does kind of help with that selection as well.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good. Like, yeah, having the Zillow platform, but also like, these are the things that I look for. But having the experience of just being in that industry, like you working in that space, you kind of know like the lifestyle, what they want, just a place to sleep and to work, and because like medical students are really busy. Like they have a lot to do, and like they're not like, I need some super luxurious like place to where I can do all my social media content. Like they're not influencers. They don't need that. They just place to rest, something comfortable, so they can just go about their day, right? Like that's that's the avatar. What are some kind of as we near the end here, I because I know we can talk like forever about this. I
Yeah.
love this stuff. What are some key lessons you've learned along the way that like you wish you knew aside from cash free equity with tax out, or I'm sorry, with like tax free cash out refinances, but aside from that, like what are some key lessons that you've learned that you wish you knew when you started?
Totally. Just to reemphasize, the cash out refinance and cost segregation studies, like those were big lessons I've learned. I would say like don't wait to rehab or like to do value add if you have the means to do it. You know, a friend and actually my agent had said, like, he said this quote to me, just like my head, it's like get more for less. Like don't go nuts with your rehab, but like again, my theory is people make their decision pretty quickly. Like when they walk into a unit, make it look nice, but like don't wait to like necessarily do it if you have the means to do it. Meaning you have the capital to make that kitchen look nice, or it's a good time. For example, if you have, for me, if a student says like, hey, we're going back for the summer, I've done rehabs like while people are like technically still living there, but obviously everything's in writing and stuff. But
Yeah.
I would say an emphasis on like operational systems. You know, like if specifically if you're self-managing, like get your policies, procedures in place, get communication, you know, really clear with tenants. The biggest lessons are hands down been the scaling ones.
The
you know,
scaling, yeah. Okay.
Someone more experienced than me might be listening and say like, wow, this guy could have really like transformed his portfolio like much sooner had he known these things, and that person would be right. So those are the scaling parts that are biggest lessons I've learned. But for anyone who's like new to this, that first building is the hardest, and I promise it snowballs after that if you do it right.
And last question before we close, what advice would you give to anyone new that wants to build financial freedom, that wants to be able to establish some cash flow, you know, retire early, whatever the goal might be? Like any advice that you have for anyone looking to get into that space, into what you've done?
Totally. If you are someone who doesn't have a building and is renting, really consider house hacking. And here's a specific exercise to do. Find out the break even. So if you buy, let's say you pay $1,500 in rent, and you do the math on a 3-flat, and for you to live in that 3-flat, you're gonna negative $1,500 cash flow, right? So it's almost like apples to apples, but it's not really apples to apples, Ben. You're making money on like the tax side of things. You can do depreciation, you have expenses. You're making money from principal pay down. The other 2 units you have rented out are paying the rent. It's going to appreciate, right? So like, let's stop analyzing things in year 1. Embrace the long-term play of this. This is not like a get rich, like quick scheme kind of thing. Yeah. But if you like find out that number and like the specific, you might have to help me out with this, the IRR, the internal rate of return. It's kind of like this calculation that people take, like big investors take all of their metrics into. There's a cash flow. I do think you should solve the cash flow, like figure out that number, but don't forget you're making money from principal pay down, appreciation, and all the tax benefits. But if you can calculate a ballpark number, sometimes negative cash flowing $2,000 versus paying $1,500 in rent is a much better situation to be in. Plus, like for tax purposes, like you're probably not making like a huge profit because you're living within the building. The other thing is just like work on mindset. Think big. Have a vision and very, very clear goals, and don't step away from those kind of things. And then the last thing, I mentioned this before, but like really embrace the sweat equity. There's been such like such a negativity around like, oh, like working a W-2 to like save money is not the way to do it, or like passive income, you know, like it's not a passive game, especially when you're starting out to it. Like embrace the sweat equity. Know that you will work a little bit harder, but that's going to translate into success later on in life. It's a long-term play, then. Like it's not like, you know.
That's it. It's the long-term play. I love that, dude. Like everything you said is so good. And like to anyone there, like listening, like this is not a get rich quick. And like, if you play your cards right, like the reward is like ridiculous, because you could work 1 to 2 hours a week and make the income of someone working 60 hours a week, right? Like in this example here. And like I think mindset, we didn't touch on mindset this call, and I think we can next time, but like, yeah, mindset's really important too, because people forget, or people lose track, and they're like, I'm just gonna go buy the single family home, or I'm gonna go buy the condo. Like, I'll just forget it. Like, it's not worth it, and they lose sight of that, you know, path. But any final words that you have that you want to add that like maybe we didn't really touch on, or anything?
Yeah, the last thing I would say is just really be honest and genuine with yourself on why you want to get into this. The obvious answer is like, well, I want to make money, and I got somehow, and this seems to be the best investment vehicle to do it. If you're truly chasing like financial freedom through cash flow, one way to conceptualize this is like buying yourself out. So like, I have like this salary, and it awards me like this lifestyle. If I can attain that like through like real estate cash flow, I'll get there. Having just a really clear vision on like why you're doing this, and I think that helps in like the mindset piece of like, okay, like I'm not looking necessarily to retire now, but I'd like to retire maybe a little bit earlier than a traditional age. Like, you'll get there through real estate, but by having kind of a healthy lookout that way.
Right. Yeah, I love, yeah, some people call it like your freedom number. Like, what does your cash flow need to be to where you can probably quit your job and be okay and still manage your lifestyle? Everyone's different. Like, some people are like, I want to have 100 doors and I want to do 100K a month cash flow. Like, they just, great, fantastic. I have other people that are like, man, if I got 2 grand a month or 4 grand a month cash flow, that would dramatically change my lifestyle.
It would.
Like, I have a part-time teacher that I was helping out. She is like around that retirement age. And because she has a multi-unit building, she could teach part-time online and like have time to travel. She only works like 15, 20 hours a week, and she's happy because she has only one building, but it provides enough income. It's like, that's it, right? So like Chris was saying, everybody's different. What's your number? And like, where do you want it to be to where like you're like, okay, I could retire, or not retire, but I can like quit my job, or like my lifestyle would change. I think that's phenomenal. Chris, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time out to hop on this call with me. I would love to do it again. I know a lot of my clients, a lot of my listeners would really find a lot of value from this. And I'll include some resources in this video below. If anyone is still watching to this point or listening to this point, I'm going to have a landlord bundle included in the description. So all the documents you need to look like a professional landlord, from like the lease agreements to eviction notices to like receipts for the rent, like everything on paper, I have it included for free, and I'll have an Airbnb bundle as well, even though it's kind of not what we talked about, but still. Thank you so much, Chris, for you taking the time out to hop on this call, and we'll do another one soon, okay?
Thanks so much, Ben, and I wish everyone the best in their investing journeys.
Cool. Thank you.